we're now going into the Policies Roundtable, a lively discussion on open science policies practice in regional projects. So very much related to the previous discussions. So we have Jos van Wezel, who will be the chair of this session.
Well, good afternoon, everybody in the audience, and of course also especially the members of the panel that we have assembled today. Welcome to this session on the active work in the regional projects. Sometimes you may call them EOSC supporting projects on open science policies. And in the last 2 years, in an ongoing collaboration, these projects have exchanged topics and ideas that helped to increase the understanding of the approaches and differences in the regions and in the member states with regard to shaping open science. In a number of reports and recommendations and participation in formal working groups, these projects and the people in the panel contributed considerably to the early development of EOSC. Open science policies, they form the basis of a structured approach on open science, which new organizations like EOSC Association can build on. And as we heard already today, they also underpin many activities in the plans of the evolving national initiatives. And they now seek to connect with EOSC, which is, of course, another challenge on this open policy platform. And in order they do that to build this European open data web. Okay, the people in the panel that will now discuss, we only have 30 minutes, I must say in advance. We'll discuss several aspects of what I just said. And they are experts on several aspects of open science, on the social, the legal and organizational parts. And well, we're very happy to have you here at this symposium. And may I ask you to introduce yourself in a few lines? We'll start with Vanessa.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be with you. And I'm sorry I couldn't listen to the previous session, so I hope I won't be repeating too much. But my name is Vanessa Proudman, and I'm the director of SPARC Europe, and we've been working on open science and open education policy development for a number of years now. But I've been working together with Joy on the FAIRsFAIR project and looking at policy there. So that's why I'm with you today and looking forward to talking more about policy. Thank you.
Joy, please.
Yeah, hi, my name is Joy Davidson. I'm the coordinator for the Digital Curation Centre in the UK. I'm based at the University of Glasgow. And as Vanessa said, I currently lead Work Package 3 in FAIRsFAIR, where our focus is on fair policies and practice. So we have quite a few activities in the project that look specifically at open science policies. So happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Dale, please.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be with you all. I'm Dale Robertson. I work for JISC in the UK, where I engage with EU projects. So I took part in the policies work package of the EOS pilot project. I've recently finished working in the EOS Hub project, where I was involved with work relating to governance and sustainability. I'm beginning working in the EOS Future project, and of course for the last 18 months I've been involved in the EOSC Synergy project, one of the regional projects, contributing the UK part of the policies work there.
Thank you. Caterina, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Caterina Sganga. I am associate professor at Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna. I'm a lawyer here, as I cooperated with the EOSC-Pillar project in a study that was conducted under the supervision of EOS and KIT on the legal framework for open science, enabling and sources and obstacles to open science last December. And that's also the contribution I will bring to this policy discussion today. I happen to be also the coordinator of an Horizon 2020 project called Recreating Europe, working on digital copyright law in Europe and what we can do to make copyright more accessible and at the same time also an enabler of access to culture and cultural diversity. So that's it, and looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you. And Eleni, everybody knows already who you are, but still you're already famous in one day.
Just a quick hello. This session comes really very convenient after the previous one, and I believe the one complements the other, and actually had a very interesting discussion and statement. So I'm Eleni Toli. I work for the ATHENA Research Center in Greece. I'm the project director of NIFOS Europe project, and I have been involved in this task force since the very beginning.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit, I need to organize a little bit if there are any questions in the chat, but Rob, you are helping me there, right?
Sure thing, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Because, okay, but let's start up with a question on all, and I will take the same sequence then, starting with Vanessa. And in this case, it's specific to the recent projects. You have worked in a lot of projects, but I'm in this case referring to the ongoing projects. In your case, Vanessa, FAIRsFAIR. What specific topics regarding open science and open data policies have you addressed in your project?
So I think because Joy is the lead in FAIRsFAIR on policy, I'm going to leave most of that to her. But what was important for us in the FAIRsFAIR project is to look at how fair some of Europe's policies were across Europe. So we looked at national policies, we look at funder policies, the policies of publishers and also institutions. And I had a deep dive into some of the national policies as well as the national funder policies. And what was quite interesting when we analysed the existing policies, some of them were really rather aspirational. They were quite high level, whereas others were quite detailed and talked about the importance of data citations or preservation, and they referred to FAIR, but the majority didn't talk about FAIR. So it was really to first analyse where were policies currently, and also if we wanted alignment on FAIR, to also ensure that EOSC really works well and is supported by that strong policy framework. We had to understand where they were, and then we came up with some recommendations based on some of the good practices that we identified. But I think I'd like to now pass on, because I probably already said too much, pass on perhaps to Joy to also speak to the FAIRsFAIR part of the policy, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for all of the information. That saves me having to cover some of it. So yeah, just as Vanessa mentioned, quite a lot of the early activity we had in FAIRsFAIR was to just get a sense of the landscape. So we tried to get a snapshot in 2019 to pick up on some of the things Vanessa mentioned. One of the things we were trying to do was to get a comparison of what was in the policies across some of the stakeholders that we were reviewing. And to do that, we ended up having to kind of come up with a structured way to do that, because it was really, really difficult just to kind of have a look at the policies and to make a comparison without doing a structured approach. The other thing that we tried to do was to base them around the priority and supporting recommendations coming out of turning FAIR into a reality report. So that was the sort of baseline that we used to try and see, you know, how the different stakeholders were looking. I think the only other things that maybe I could add to what Vanessa mentioned is that, you know, I mentioned we did have to come up with a structured way to look at the policies in that bit of work. So that was something that I think is possibly of use to other people, to have a look at that template and see if it's useful to help others to describe their policies. And we are also just in the process now of trying to help policymakers who have registered an expression of interest based on an open call that we had earlier this year, to work with us to have a look at their policies against those recommendations that Vanessa mentioned we developed. So that work is just kicking off over the summer, and we'll be working with them to kind of see how their policies align with our recommendations and to provide some recommendations on how they might be further aligned to support FAIR. I think that's probably enough from FAIRsFAIR for now.
Yes, and it's always impressive to hear the wealth of information that FAIRsFAIR is actually addressing. Still, Dale, there is some impression that you can give from the EOSC Synergy project for sure. That is also interesting for the audience to know about.
Yeah, sure. So EOSC Synergy, I think in common with the other regional projects, which were more country specific, whereas FAIRsFAIR, of course, is a more horizontal project. We started out in terms of policies by conducting a landscaping exercise, which was relatively wide-ranging in its scope. But after we had done that, we then, so over the course of the last 9 months or so within the Synergy project, we've been performing a gap analysis exercise where based on the landscape, the information that we gathered in our landscaping exercises, we've focused more on what we perceived to be the gap areas, which were of the most importance. And those areas, in our case, were open science strategy, funding, PIDs, access, awareness, engagement and maturity sort of rolled up as a one really, and also touching on procurement. So I think the Synergy project differed slightly in its approach from the other regional projects after having done the landscaping exercise. So those exercises were somewhat harmonized, but then I think we went off and pursued our original committed path that had always been envisaged. And the gap exercises, it's still ongoing. We're actually getting towards the end of it now, and we will be publishing a deliverable which writes up the results, including recommendations drawn from the gap analysis exercise, and that should be published within the next few weeks actually. So we're still in the process at the moment of really formulating and kind of working on the recommendations. There'll be initial draft recommendations actually, which would then roll forward into the next phase of work where we would be validating those recommendations and discussing them on a national basis with relevant stakeholders. But those are the topics that we've focused in on within our project.
Thank you. And Eleni, alongside the same question, of course, but maybe with respect to the national initiatives, how did you how is your project addressing open science policies with respect to getting this message across in a new environment and getting scientists behind this idea in this wealth of NIFOS?
Actually, being an implementation project, NIFOS, we work on 3 major lines of action. The one related to the national initiative is a core activity for us, and we develop all the things that I have also presented in the previous section about the models and the guidelines. So policies that can be adapted and adopted by local stakeholders and adjusted to their needs. We provide some general directions regarding respecting ORDM, following the FAIR principles, and trying to provide an overall framework for the operation of these networks within the country. But again, being an implementation project, we have, I would say, 3 major lines of action. So the one is the national initiatives and all the related work with the policies, but we do also actual onboarding. And in this, we have developed, for example, policies that support the technical onboarding of HPC centers. This is just to provide you an example. These are the type of policies that are not for the broader public, are not for the policymakers, but certainly are very useful for researchers who would like to join and to align their work closer to EOSC. And same we did also with FAIR and ORDM. We developed some guidelines, we developed suggestions, and based on them also we developed, we came up with a, it's too pity to say a list of incentives, but we really tried to formulate them in a very short and concise way to see how, what are the policy measures at the end of the day that someone can use in order to support or enforce ORDM and FAIR among the researchers.
Yes, and this brings us actually the bridge between the policy and the person that has to work along this policy is, of course, I mean, you could ask if a policy should be written for the researcher and not based on on what is the common knowledge, what should be in the policy, right? There should be an easy way of introducing these policies. Actually, what is not probably easy to introduce in policies, open science policies, is maybe the legal aspects. Caterina, you have contributed to the EOSC-Pillar project with the legal parts of open science policies. What were your contributions, and what did you find there to make it easy for researchers to adopt open science policies, although there are legal aspects in these policies hidden or explicitly?
Yes, we developed a number of tools, starting from the mapping of legal sources in the countries subject to our analysis. And on the basis of the mapping we conducted, we were able at the same time to identify both enabling sources, so sources which are actually capable of allowing researchers to perform open science in a meaningful, safe manner according to the FAIR principles. But on the other hand, we also sketched a number of obstacles that are supposed to be amended by legislators, both national and European, in order for open science to really take place. The analysis is problematic for one reason, because we don't just have one single area of law that is involved in the analysis. We have all the intellectual property law part, we have the personal data protection part, and we have all the realm of laws related to non-personal data. And that's just to mention the broadest picture and the most important bodies of law. And within each of these realms, particularly because they are not necessarily so well connected, we found a number of positive steps forward which were made by European and national legislators, but we also identified a number of elements which still needs to be tackled in order for open science to properly take place. If you want, I can enter into more details depending on how much you wanna know about that. But I believe that it's fundamental for projects like the one we are all dealing with, not just to provide tools for researchers to take out the best in terms of practical guidelines for what the legal framework offers, but also to reflect on what bottom-up member states can do in order to create an harmonization that at the European level is not necessarily the easiest thing to reach. Mm-hmm. So okay. This is actually something that I believe is worth thinking about from the side of standardization, from the side of all those areas of flexibilities left by EU law, where member states here in associations like the one organizing this symposium today can come together and discuss to see what can be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So, and then I'd like to move with what you said, Caterina. Thank you. To Dale. So, did you see? And I'm also reflecting a little bit on your work with the working groups. Did you see any? Or can you can you say that policy work that was done in the project, how did this influence the shaping of EOSC today, and did it help drive open science in some respect? What are the aspects that were delivered by our projects, your project, to the current status of EOSC?
Mm-hmm. So I think the collaboration within between our project and other projects, it has been helpful actually overall. So firstly, there's the collaboration between the different regional projects within the, well, in the most relevant case here for the representatives here, it's been the Task Force on National Policies. And I think this has been useful because there's been an element of harmonization, for example, of these landscaping surveys that I mentioned earlier. So I think that has been helpful. And then more broadly, of course, there's been, as a result of that collaboration, there's been an increased awareness of the topics that need to be addressed. And then looking more broadly at collaboration between our projects and other projects, and also, of course, with the EOSC working groups in the work that's gone on over the last couple of years. I think there's a greater awareness and definition of what are the key priority areas and topics that have to be addressed in order to achieve the EOSC, if you like, and to further the aims of open science. There's been progress towards a clearer definition of the EOSC and the objectives of the EOSC, for example, in the SRIA with the KPIs which are listed there. So I think there's this greater focus available now than was the case a couple of years ago, which definitely helps. And that, I think, in turn feeds back and allows the projects to focus a little more clearly on what they need to be addressing. But also, I think there's the element of the fact that these projects exist, I think increases awareness as well generally. And the regional projects are all doing outreach within their own respective groupings of countries. And that increased awareness, I think, is very important as an element in helping to both raise awareness of the goals of open science, but also, I think, to transmit the sheer commitment and energy that exists within our community towards actually trying to achieve those goals as well. So I think overall there have been some quite positive contributions made over the timescale so far of these projects, and obviously the projects still continue, and we'll do further work to try to help.
Thank you. So Vanessa, having heard that the projects seem to work together, or at least exchange information, as Dale mentioned, what other things could you think of that policy coordination could be improved with? And maybe you share this with Joy. I'm not sure, but what ideas beyond the current projects? What other coordination action points would you see there?
Yeah, so I'd like to echo the usefulness of the task force of us coming together. But I mean, what we've seen across Europe, so firstly, the European Commission has really shown leadership with their policy and also the new policy going forward. And we've seen national policies and national research funder policies looking towards that policy when forming their own policies. So we've seen a lot of organic growth of policies across Europe. And just like you have a joined up now open science infrastructure with EOSC, I think we need to look more towards a more joined up policy approach, so that we're singing from the same hymn sheet. And to make it also simple for that mobile researcher who moves from one institution to another. Research has knows really no borders often. And so I think now it's not to say that there isn't already a lot of coordination, not just amongst the projects. You've got Science Europe who's talking to the national research funders. You've got the European University Association also talking about policy and researching policy among institutions. You have CONOSC also looking at the national policymakers, bringing those together. You've got national open science networks talking to each other. You've got the open air NOADs. We also, as part of FAIRsFAIR, we did some desk research to look at other open science policy resources. I think we came up with more than 150 resources. So you can see there is quite a lot of coordination, but what's missing is bringing those groups, those research funders, those national funders, those institutional funders and policymakers, bringing them together to talk about some of those bigger challenges with policymaking, like fair or reuse, preservation, or new areas of policy development like the Digital Services Act. And I think what's important is that we also find a joined up approach to track progress, because I think we're all interested in seeing how effective are our policies. How can we monitor that? And there's no point us doing this all in parallel, yeah? So how could we talk more together? How can we share some of those good and bad practices, learn from one another? And then when we make recommendations, which some of these projects have been doing, how can we test them out in these in a more joined up, coordinated framework? And then also to share some of those policy implementation tools, which, for example, Science Europe recently brought out. So I think there's lots of great opportunities. There is a lot of development in policy, but it's really important that we create some more alignment and coordination between policymakers.
Thank you. Since also EOSC and open science and data is also directly connected to FAIR, I'd like to ask a question, Joy, on the fairness of policy support. How can policies improve fairness of data?
So I think we've all recognized the importance of policies within the ecosystem. We need to have harmonization of the policies. I think that would be one way to support fair practices, just to be a little bit more clear across the board on what we mean by fair. I think the key thing, and I think we've heard this already, is that researchers need to have a sort of an easy way to be able to understand what the policy requests of them and to be able to comply. So I think if we want people to be able to adhere with the FAIR principles and align their work to enable their outcomes to become fair, we have to really make that clear to people and spell it out. So I think in policies that we looked at as part of our analysis, we found things, around the sharing of metadata, and metadata is really a core aspect of the FAIR principles. And while many of the funders and publishers and universities are very clear about sharing of data, it's not quite as clear that we would expect metadata to be shared as well as an output of research. So I think there's some minor tweaks that we can do around the language and clarification about what we mean in our policies. I think the other thing that we found in our review was that whether people referred to FAIR explicitly within their policy or implicitly, it really doesn't matter. I think as long as they're clear about what the expectations are and that the researchers understand what research data management or data sharing or working towards FAIR means. So I think it's all about clarity and really just trying to be clear in the policies and in the related support that we provide to researchers.
Thank you. So I think we have a lot of components now together for these open science policies, the improved coordination, the projects, the legal aspects, the education, the cultural change, the fairness of data. I want to go one step towards the legal parts, because I've been working, as Caterina also said, with these aspects in the Pillar project. Do you think that open science at the moment is held back by legal issues or legal alignment on these topics? or where should the legal component that of course is in the jurisdiction of the member states improve so that open science can thrive and continue to thrive?
For sure, there are several aspects where we can still intervene, and positive steps forward where, for example, the text and data mining intervention, which we recently had on the copyright side. We have a directive like the Open Data Directive now targeting also research data and inviting research institutions to go for fair ecosystems. We now see also in the recent proposals at the EU level, for example, the Data Act and beyond, they are rethinking about putting the hands on the database directive to facilitate the exchange of data. So moving away from pure privatization and making things easier to handle. For sure, what we need to do is to reduce complexity and to come out from the idea that rights and property rights are the rule and exceptions are the exceptions. This is what you see everywhere. You see it in the GDPR, you see it at the level of non-personal data, you see it at the level of IP. That's an approach which made sense when we had national borders and when it was clear who was the author, who was the consumer, who was the users. It doesn't make any sense in a reality where open data is the future. And when our research is based on open data. Then we don't need to think about rights and exceptions, but we need to think about compatibility of uses and interoperability with respect of the rights of everyone, particularly fundamental rights. And this is the way that the EU should look forward to as an horizontal approach to all the legal aspects and the legal bodies we are discussing. Then we can enter into details for sure in policy recommendation, but I would say that for a 1-minute answer, that would be my take.
And very clear as well. Thank you.
May I add to this, Jos?
Sure. Go ahead, Eleni.
Because this is something we have discussed really a lot within EFOS Europe. I share Caterina's approach that I have the feeling that the legal framework becomes more solid and provides really a very good framework conditions. What is currently getting very difficult is how to implement this legal framework, how this can be used by the researchers in their everyday activities. We have the Open Data Act, we have a number of regulations that really support open science, but it's not easy to put them in practice. We realize this, we have developed 2 legal tools and in EFOS, and we say that these are technical solutions to legal problems because we realized that there are every day even more people who have to deal with legal issues without being legal experts. So we need to provide to these people some kind of support in order to strengthen the open science implementation even more.
Okay. Fair enough. Before it is already 4 o'clock, I would like to add another question that I'm in relation to the national initiatives as well. But I know, Dale, you're under pressure, but if you can hold on for a few minutes, maybe. Okay. And then, well, let me first ask officially if there is someone in the audience that wants to ask a question to one of your experts. You have explained your field of expertise and the work that you did in the different projects. Maybe there's a direct question. Now is your chance to pose that. If not, then right. So what I'd like to know, and this is actually a question to all of you, and this was triggered by a message in the chat. Large organizations, they have their policies in order sometimes, right? Well, most of the time. We learned this from the National Initiative Survey that was done in the EOSC-Pillar. However, if you go to smaller institutions, universities, you see that there is a lack of open science policies and official guidelines with this respect. Since there's a lot of people that are interested in national initiatives in this audience, I would like to start with you, Eleni. Can you what would be the best approach, and why do you think that these smaller organizations do not have this framework yet established? And what would be the best approach for these organizations to get that done? Should this be part, for instance, of an effort that national policies bring? The national initiatives bring?
I think that what we also witnessed and what we saw through our landscaping survey is that, first of all, not always the big organizations have their policies regulated, and a bigger organization without policies is an even bigger problem than a small organization without policies. So it is not easy. We saw that there are forerunners in some countries. Organizations who develop their own institutional policy, and because it's so well formulated, it becomes the national policy, or it influences the drafting of the national policy heavily. In our region, we have seen this in several countries, because we also deal with small countries. Several of the countries are really small, and the actors are really very well connected to each other. This is very important, and the collaboration of all actors in the country, and really providing a forum and a space for sharing information, will also help organizations that don't have policies in place, because this has not been their priority, to start thinking about this, because the overall environment goes in this direction, and the overall environment also at national level, with the initiatives we are at least discussing in our region, but also the impact that the overall EOSC activity has in several, in all the countries and the institutions participating to it.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to give her opinion to that, or to reaction to that?
I could just add something at a very practical sort of a point, is that for smaller institutions that may be struggling to think about getting a policy started, there's so much out there that can be reused. I think, there's resources from NIFOS, for example. They have some templates that can be used. Open Air has some checklists and templates. So I think there's no reason that any smaller organization has to start from scratch. So we would always encourage people to, adapt what's already out there, and not to have to reinvent any wheels.
Mm-hmm. Should the EOSC Association have something on the shelf to?
I think what we're lacking at the moment is what should be included in a policy, an open science policy, as a sort of standard set of elements that we would expect to see for different stakeholders. So it might be slightly different for funding bodies, as it might then be to what is expected at the university level. But I think if we are moving towards a landscape that will be monitored, so if we are considering things like EOSC readiness and how policies fit into those sorts of indicators, we really need to move away from just the existence of a policy being the indicator. Having a policy is one thing, but it's the content of the policy that actually is really what we need to know. So I think there's definitely room to try and work more closely with the EOSC partnership and the EOSC Association to determine what those sorts of elements might be for the different stakeholders. So I think that would be one area that we could certainly try to progress collectively.
So maybe I can also, it's just echoing what I was saying, the importance of coordination and sharing knowledge. And there's one thing doing an analysis with quantitative data and comparing, like with like, but what's really missing is the tacit knowledge. So people are discussing the challenges that they have, trying things out, exploring possibilities. So bringing those policymakers together, I think, is really important. And talking about the big and the small, it's not necessarily the case. So sometimes smaller organizations have a lot more freedom to actually have much stronger policies than the larger ones. Because if you're thinking about, so this is another point, sorry, just going off. If you think about setting a national policy or a national research funder policy, of course, it needs to address perhaps many different disciplines, many different communities. So the freedom to really address the needs of a specific community, you can't really effectively do well, which a small organization could do well. So you sometimes see much stronger policies that really understand the research community being set up in smaller organizations. And on the other hand, you've also got large national policies in place that also really need to see those policies being implemented by the research institutions. And so ideally, those research institutions don't just say, oh, well, there is a national policy. They should also have a local policy in place, which is another tool to get things done, to encourage and to show that their research is, that it's important for researchers to share that data. So I think it's quite complex, and this is why those different actors need to come together, and EOSC can have an important role in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. I'm already saying goodbye to Dale. Thank you, Dale. As first, because I know you're on the jumping seat now. But I'd like to close as well, because a lot of people expected this to end at 4 o'clock. Thank you all, Vanessa, Dale, Caterina, Eleni, Joy, for joining us here in this session. And yes, don't forget, there is indeed another special session on the indicators that Joy mentioned somewhere during coming days. And see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you.